Okay, so have you ever heard of this book, The Art of Worldly Wisdom?
I have, yeah, it's a fascinating read.
It's from like the 1600s, right? 1647, I think.
You're right, 1647. Wild, right? What wisdom could someone from that era possibly offer us now? Well, a lot, as it turns out.
Seriously. I mean, at first glance, you'd think it's just like outdated advice for courtiers or something.
Right, like how to navigate those powdered wig parties.
Exactly. But then you start reading, and it's like, whoa, this guy was onto something.
Yeah, the author, Baltasar Gracián, he was this Jesuit priest.
A priest giving advice on worldly wisdom.
Don't let that fool you.
Yeah.
He was super sharp, a keen observer of human nature, especially when it came to power dynamics.
So less about piety, more about like social strategy.
Exactly. He believed that to thrive, you needed this savvy, this street smarts. He called it worldly wisdom, basically the art of dealing with people and situations effectively, even when things get a bit, shall we say, tricky.
Introducing Some Books, the new generation of podcasts. Subscribe now to stay updated with our latest content.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So like what kind of advice are we talking about here? Give us the juicy stuff.
Well, he actually said that more is required nowadays to make a single wise man than formerly to make 7 sages. And more is needed nowadays to deal with a single person than was required with a whole people in former times.
Wow, he thought things were already getting complicated back then.
And boy, was he right. I mean, if he thought the 1600s were a handful, imagine him trying to navigate our world today. Information overload, cutthroat competition, the pressure to be on all the time.
It's a lot. So how do we even begin to unpack all this worldly wisdom? Where do we start?
Well, Gracian was a big believer in both character and the intellect. He famously said, "Intellect sufficeth not, character is also needed." In other words, being smart isn't enough. You need a solid moral compass to guide you.
Right, like you can be brilliant, but if you're using your powers for evil.
Exactly. He saw how easily even the most brilliant minds could stumble without a strong sense of self and a commitment to ethical behavior.
It's like those stories you hear about like super successful CEOs or celebrities who have these epic meltdowns because they lack, basic human decency.
It happens all the time. They might have the intelligence to climb to the top, but without that solid character, that moral core, it can all come crashing down.
So it's about finding that balance, brains and heart.
Exactly. Grecian wasn't naive about ambition or the desire for success. He just believed that true, lasting success required more than just smarts. It required a strong moral foundation. He understood that knowledge, especially knowledge about people, was power, but not just observing. You had to analyze and strategize.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually cultivate that kind of character, that moral compass, especially in a world that often seems to reward the opposite?
Right. It's a question for the ages. And this is where Gratian gets really interesting. He had a lot to say about strategy and social dynamics. One of his most intriguing ideas, I think, was this concept of finding each man's thumbscrew.
Thumbscrew. Okay, that sounds a little intense, even for the 1600s. Break it down for us. What did he mean by that?
Essentially, he believed that every person has this key motivator, a thumbscrew, that drives their actions and decisions. To understand someone, to influence them, you had to figure out what made them tick.
So it's about understanding their motivations, their desires, even their fears. Kind of like emotional intelligence, but maybe with higher stakes because, 17th century life and all that.
Exactly.
It's almost like everyone has their own little instruction manual, and if you can figure out the code, you can communicate with them way more effectively. So not manipulating them, but...
Right, not manipulation. Gratian was more about using this understanding to navigate complex situations, achieve your goals, but like ethically.
Gotcha. So kind of like understanding people's motivations, not exploiting them.
Exactly. And honestly, that's a skill that's valuable in any century, right?
Yeah.
No matter what you do or where you go in life, understanding people is key.
Totally. It's like that whole people skills thing. You hear it all the time, but it's true. Okay, so back to Gratian. What else did he have to say about all that?
Well, he also had this idea that you shouldn't always act on your first impulse.
Oh, interesting. So not always just jumping into action. I can see how that would have been good advice back then, especially in like courtly life, where one wrong move could be.
Oh yeah, off with your head, literally.
Exactly. But isn't there something to be said for trusting your gut sometimes?
Absolutely. And Gratian wasn't saying you should overthink every single decision. Sometimes you do need to move quickly, trust your instincts. But he was also aware of how often we react emotionally, especially when things are tense,
Oh, for sure. Like when the pressure's on, you just kind of...
You snap. Exactly. So he believed in being more strategic, taking a beat to think about the consequences, anticipate how others might react. He wrote, "Man's life is a warfare against the malice of men, and sagacity fights with strategic changes of intention. It never does what it threatens. It aims only at escaping notice."
So like a chess game, almost. Thinking a few steps ahead.
Exactly. And honestly, who couldn't benefit from that in
Right.
today's world? Things move so fast, it's easy to get caught up in the rush.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about character, we've talked about strategy, but what about like reputation? That feels huge, especially today. Did Gratian have any thoughts on that?
Oh, he did. And it's kind of spooky how relevant it still is. He had these two aphorisms. A good reputation is hard won but easily lost. And be mindful of how your actions are perceived and avoid situations that could lead to scandal.
It's like he predicted social media. One wrong post and boom, your whole reputation is.
Coast. It's true, though. And Gratian knew that even back then, word could spread like wildfire.
So image management was important even in the 1600s.
Oh, yeah. He understood that your reputation was like this valuable currency. You had to build it carefully, protect it, and be very aware of how even small actions could impact it.
It's a lot of pressure, though,
Yeah.
to always be on, you know?
It is. But he also acknowledged that, hey, we're all human, right? We make mistakes.
So did he offer any advice on how to deal with those inevitable screw-ups?
He did. And this is interesting. While he emphasized protecting your reputation, he also said that you should allow yourself some venial fault.
Wait, really? He's encouraging people to mess up.
It does sound counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Coming from the guy who's all about strategy and reputation. But I don't think he meant, like, be reckless. More like he understood that trying to appear absolutely perfect can actually backfire. He wrote, "It is a fault of excellence that being so much in use, it is liable to abuse, because all covet it, all are vexed by it."
Oh, interesting. So it's like that saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good, or like people who seem too perfect.
It's annoying. Exactly. It breeds this resentment, you know?
Like you want to see them trip up a little.
Totally. It's human nature. So I think Gratian understood that a little vulnerability, a little humility could actually make you more relatable. He wrote, "It is an especial privilege of good taste to enjoy everything at its ripest, and that not all can do this, nor do all who can know this."
It's almost like he's saying, don't be afraid to be your authentic self, flaws and all.
Exactly. And that's refreshing, you know,
Yeah.
to hear that even back then, someone recognized the value in that.
Totally. So it's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Between being competent, but also...
Human.
Yes. Not seeming like a robot programmed for success.
And that's the thing with Gratian. He doesn't give you like a step-by-step guide. It's more about these nuanced observations that make you really think about your own life. He just understood that people are complex and there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
It's true. Okay, so we've got character, strategy, reputation, the importance of authenticity. What else? Did he believe in, like, seeking out mentors, learning from others?
Absolutely. He was a big believer in surrounding yourself with people who could teach you things, offer different perspectives, challenge your assumptions. He actually said, cultivate those who can teach you. He wrote, let friendly intercourse be a school of knowledge, and culture be taught through conversation.
It's like that quote, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Choose wisely.
Right. And I love that he emphasized those who can teach you, because a mentor doesn't have to be like this older, wiser figure.
Yeah.
It could be anyone who has something valuable to offer, regardless of their age or background.
That's such a good point. It's about being open to learning from everywhere and everyone. But even with the best mentors and the smartest strategies, the world keeps spinning, right? Things change. How did Gratian deal with that? I mean, his advice is timeless, but...
He knew that, yeah.
Yeah.
The world was this ever-changing thing. He even wrote, that while adhering to timeless principles, recognize that what's considered fashionable and acceptable evolves over time. Adapt your approach accordingly without compromising your integrity.
He sounds like he'd fit right in today. Always be adapting, right?
Totally. He was all about adapting, but like not losing sight of your values, you know?
So being flexible, but not spineless. I like it.
Exactly. Think about how different things are now, even compared to like the 90s. The internet, social media, the way we communicate, it's a whole new ballgame.
It's true. It's like the rules are constantly being rewritten.
And it's the people who can adapt, who are willing to learn and evolve that end up thriving. So what can people actually do?
Right. That's the big question. With all this talk about strategy and everything, it's easy to get overwhelmed. What are like the top takeaways from all this worldly wisdom? What
Yeah.
can our listeners actually, use in their lives?
Well, I think the biggest thing is observation. Really paying attention to the world around you, studying human behavior, learning from your own experiences. Gracian even wrote, think over things, most over the most important.
It's so easy to just like go through the motions,
Yeah.
instead of actually stopping and thinking.
Totally. And then building on that, I'd say self-awareness is huge.
Mm.
Knowing your strengths, your weaknesses. Remember that thumbs through concept?
Oh, right, right. Everyone's got their thing.
Exactly. And understanding what makes you tick, what motivates you, your values, your triggers, that's incredibly powerful.
It's like they say, know thyself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, I'd say be strategic. Think a few steps ahead, have a plan, even if it's a loose one.
So don't just react to whatever life throws at you. Actually, try to steer the ship a little.
Yes, exactly. It's about being intentional, whether it's a career move, a relationship, anything really. Taking that time to think things through can make a world of difference.
Totally. Well, this has been fascinating. Gracian, you sly dog, you still got it.
Yeah.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Just this. Take Gracian's advice. Try it on for size. See what works for you. His work is full of these little nuggets of insight, but it's up to us to apply them to our own lives. Which aphorism spoke to you? Which ones surprised you? Use those reflections, those insights, to navigate your own path.
I love it. So take Gracian's wisdom, make it your own, and go forth and conquer it.
Conquer those challenges
Yeah.
and have fun doing it.
Exactly. That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving for your own version of worldly wisdom.